On March 14th, a notice of intent to reclaim property was filed with the city records office. It named one address, one plot of land, one single-family home. By April, 2 lives had been permanently altered by it. My name is Noah. 3 months ago, I finally got my therapist license. It was the culmination of 6 years of night school, clinic hours, and mountains of debt. I was broke, exhausted, and desperately proud. The job at the Tranquil Path Wellness Center felt like a lifeline. It wasn't the private practice I dreamed of, but it was a start. A real job, a real salary. The director, Helen Vance, interviewed me herself. She was in her late 40s, with a presence that was both calming and surgically precise. She had this way of looking at you, a soft smile on her face, that made you feel like you were the only person in the world, and also that she knew every single one of your inadequacies. She hired me on the spot. The pay was modest, barely enough to cover my student loans and the rent on my tiny apartment. But she sold me on the mission. We serve the community, she'd said, her voice like warm honey. We provide a sanctuary. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. Act 1, Side A. My first month was a blur of intake forms and stressed out clients. I loved the work, hated the administration. Helen ran a tight ship, and tight was a euphemism for suffocating. Every expense was scrutinized. We had to use cheap, scratchy tissues because the softer brand was 9 cents more per box. 9 cents. One afternoon, she called me into her office. The room was immaculate, all white and beige, with a single perfect orchid on her desk. She gestured to the chair. "Noah," she started, her smile never wavering. "You've been doing wonderful work. Truly." I felt a swell of pride. "Thank you, Helen. I'm really trying my best." "I know you are. Which is why I have a proposition." She leaned forward, folding her hands. "I know the starting salary is a hurdle. And this city is so expensive. My husband and I, we have a small guest house on our property. It's empty." My breath caught. A guest house? In this city? That was unheard of. Oh, wow. Helen, I don't know what to say. "It's very modest," she continued, "but it's clean and safe. I was thinking you could live there, rent-free. Just help out with the garden on weekends. It would take so much pressure off you financially." She said it like she was offering me a gift from the heavens. But something felt off. The intensity in her eyes was all wrong. It wasn't kindness. It was need. I hesitated. "That's incredibly generous. I'd have to think about it. My lease." Her smile tightened, just a fraction. "Of course, think about it. But the offer is there. We're a family here, Noah. We help each other." The words were warm. The feeling was ice cold. That night, I called my sister. I told her about the offer. She was silent for a long moment, then just said, "No, do not do that." Things got weirder. Helen started monitoring my client hours with an obsessive focus. We got paid a base salary, plus a small bonus for every session over a certain threshold. It was designed to encourage us to take on more clients, but she'd question my methods. If a client needed a bi-weekly session instead of weekly, she'd pull me aside. "Are you sure they can't do weekly, Noah? We need to maximize our impact." Maximizing impact sounded a lot like maximizing profit. One evening, I was the last one to leave. I saw a letter on the shared office printer that had been left behind. It was from a government agency, the Department of Social Services. The name on it wasn't Helen Vance. It was Helena Petrova. The address, however, was the wellness centers. I knew I shouldn't have, but I read the first line. It was a confirmation of benefits, food assistance, for a woman who drove a new Lexus and wore clothes that cost more than my rent. I felt sick. I left the letter on the printer, my mind racing. The next morning, it was gone, but Helen's behavior toward me changed. She was colder, more critical. I refused her guest house offer politely, citing my lease. Her response was a clipped, "Fine," followed by a week of complete silence. Then came the final straw. A client, a young woman struggling with severe anxiety, had a breakthrough. It was one of those moments that reminds you why you do this work. She was finally opening up. The next day, Helen called me into her office. She told me the client was being reassigned to her. "I feel she needs a more experienced therapist," she said, not even looking at me. It was a slap in the face, a punishment. She was taking my client, my progress, to prove a point. I knew then I couldn't stay. Act 2, Side B. Helen Vance did not see herself as a villain. She saw herself as a survivor. On March 14th, the day she filed the paperwork with the city, she felt a grim satisfaction. It was the last piece of a long, miserable puzzle. She had been born Helena Petrova in a country that no longer existed, to a family with nothing. She'd arrived in America with $200 and a dictionary. She cleaned houses. She worked cash registers. She saved every single dollar. She met a man, Richard, who was kind but impractical, and artist. She was the one who managed the money, who built their life from scratch. The wellness center was her dream, her creation. But it was bleeding money. Insurance reimbursements were slow, rent was astronomical. She hadn't taken a real salary in over a year. The Lexus was leased. The clothes were from a high-end consignment shop. Everything was for show. Projecting success was part of the business. The house, their biggest asset, wasn't fully theirs. Richard's father had left it to him, but with a complex clause. It was in a trust. They lived there, but a distant cousin held a claim to a portion of the property, a claim that would activate upon the cousin's marriage. A strange, archaic family arrangement she never understood, and 2 months ago the cousin had gotten engaged. They needed to buy him out, or a price that made her stomach clench. Every penny she had, every penny the sinner made, was being funneled into a legal fund to save her home. The stress was a physical weight on her chest. She couldn't sleep. She smiled at clients and staff while inside she was screaming. Then she hired Noah. He was young, idealistic, full of textbook theories. He reminded her of a time when she wasn't so tired. She saw his financial strain, the worn-out shoes, the way he hesitated before buying a coffee, and a desperate idea formed. The guest house. If she could rent it out, unofficially, for cash, it would be a huge help. But she couldn't just put it on the market. The trust lawyers would see. But if an employee lived there, as a perk, and maybe paid her back in cash, off the books, it was a risk. She pitched it to him as an act of generosity and hated the lie in her own mouth. When he said no, she felt a flash of hot anger. He didn't understand. He didn't see the wolf at her door. He just saw a boss overstepping. The rejection felt personal, like he was judging her, seeing the cracks in her perfect facade. And the letter. The goddamn letter. Yes, she was Helena Petrova. She had applied for assistance under her maiden name, using the center's address. It was fraud. She knew it was fraud. But the thought of losing her house, the one solid thing in her life, made her reckless. When she saw the letter on the printer, her blood ran cold. She knew he must have seen it. Now he had a weapon. Now he was a threat. Taking his client wasn't about punishment. It was about control. In a life that felt like it was spinning into chaos, she could control this one thing. She could prove she was still the one in charge. She told herself it was for the client's good. A more experienced therapist. It was another lie she swallowed down. She looked at Noah's earnest, disappointed face, and for a second, she didn't see an employee. She saw a judge, and she hated him for it. Act 3, the collision. I decided to quit. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to report her. I just wanted out. I typed up my 2 weeks' notice and walked to her office, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. Her door was ajar. I could hear her on the phone, her voice tight and strained. It wasn't the calm, composed Helen I knew. No, you don't understand, she was saying, her voice cracking. That is everything we have. Everything. A long pause. I stood frozen in the hallway. There is no more to give. She hung up. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. I should have walked away. Come back later. But I was done. I knocked softly. Helen? She looked up, and for the first time, I saw her without the mask. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked fragile. What is it, Noah? I held out the letter. I'm giving my notice. She took it without looking at it, her gaze fixed on my face. Because of the client. It wasn't a question. That's part of it, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I don't think this is the right environment for me. The right environment, she repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. You have no idea, do you? She stood up, pacing the small space behind her desk. You think you have me all figured out. The greedy boss squeezing her poor employees. I saw the letter, Helen, I said quietly. The one from social services. Addressed to Helena Petrova. The color drained from her face. She stopped pacing. She looked at me, and all the pretense was gone. Her expression was raw. You think I'm stealing from the government for fun? For new shoes? I don't know what to think. I'm losing my house, she said, the words tumbling out. My home. The place my husband grew up in. The only thing of value we have. I'm about to be 48 years old, and I'm about to have nothing. Her voice broke. This center, this sanctuary, it's barely breaking even. I haven't paid myself in a year. The offer for the guest house wasn't some weird power play. It was desperation. I needed the cash. The air left my lungs. The story I had built in my head. of a wealthy, cruel scammer crumbled. In its place was something far more complicated. Just a person terrified and backed into a corner. "You committed fraud," I said, the words feeling hollow now. It was a fact, but it missed the entire point. "Yes," she said, her chin lifting. "I did, and I would do it again." You get to a certain point, a certain age, and you realize the rules were written for someone else. You follow them your whole life, and you end up with nothing. So you break them. You do what you have to do to survive. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the cheap tissues on her desk, the faint scuff mark on her expensive-looking shoes, the terror in her eyes. I thought about my own student loan debt, the constant grinding pressure of it, the feeling that you could do everything right and still lose. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Report me? Ruin me completely? Is that what you want?" I looked at the resignation letter in her hand. I thought about the client she took from me. I thought about her crying on the phone. There was no victory here, no justice. Just two people in a quiet room, drowning in different oceans. "No," I said. "I'm just going to leave." Act 4, the silence after. I finished out my 2 weeks. It was excruciatingly quiet. We spoke only when necessary in clipped, professional tones. The mask was back up for both of us. On my last day, she handed me my final paycheck. Our fingers brushed. Neither of us pulled away. "Good luck, Noah," she said. Her voice was flat. "You too," Helen, I replied. I walked out of the Tranquil Path Wellness Center and didn't look back. The air outside felt clean. I didn't feel like a hero. I didn't feel like I'd won. I just felt quiet. A few months later, I was working at a nonprofit community clinic. The pay was even worse, but the work felt honest. One afternoon, out of a morbid curiosity I couldn't explain, I looked up the wellness center online. The website was gone. The business listing said permanently closed. I felt a strange hollow ache in my chest. Not happiness, not sadness, something else. An acknowledgement. The quiet recognition of a shared struggle fought in different ways. I never knew if she lost the house. I never knew what happened with the fraud investigation I never started. I just knew that on one specific afternoon, in a beige and white office, two people had told the truth. And then they had walked away. Sometimes I see a car that looks like her Lexus or smell a perfume that reminds me of her office, and the entire conversation plays back in my head. The raw terror in her voice, the weight of my own judgment. There was no villain in that room. Just the wreckage left behind when two people's desperation collided. HR's unwitting accomplice.